Those were truly two hard acts to follow. I will do my best. I am overjoyed with these two presentations. I couldn't have imagined a more positive and thought-provoking opening to our deliberations. Picking up from Robert's reference to the need for luck, I can say that it wasn't entirely luck that we had such a brilliant keynote speech. I mean, we could have asked Kevin O'Leary to give the speech, but we didn't, so that wasn't just luck. But on the other hand, we were very lucky that Robert accepted our invitation. So it's a good place to start. I want to insert myself a little bit between Armin and Robert. I don't think that thinking about the past is necessarily a bad thing, nor does it imply that one wants to go back to the past. We want to learn from the past, or at least that's how I would like to put the point. And when I think of it in those terms, I very readily come to the very same conclusions that Armin is proposing. And I don't think it's a question of young versus old. It is to a degree, but we're all trapped in this together. And it's not, to me at least, it doesn't make very much sense to blame the old. We were all involved in different ways, and the young are all positioned in different ways. We have to confront these issues. And to do that, we need to try to get our heads around the forces that have taken us in directions that none of us expected, least of all the mainstream economists, and virtually no one wanted. And those forces are the forces that are elucidated, that are discussed by Marx, by Polanyi, by Keynes, and they have to be our point of departure for understanding how all those things got commodified. It didn't happen by accident. And when we do that, we understand that now we've reached the point which was predictable and which was predicted. The contradictions have reached the point of the breaking point. Fascism is in the air, as Robert has reminded us. Economic crises, financial crises. I believe the current situation is absolutely precariously poised. Even the Bank of International Settlements, more than a year ago, ventured the opinion that they thought the system was in a more precarious position than it was in 2007. The interbank markets currently are hemorrhaging. The risks that have been taken, the debts outstanding, have absolutely escalated. And the point about that is that this is the nature of the crises. And Robert talked about crises as being one of the most horrendous and unnatural phenomena. The point about crises is that everything works against each other. In other words, as the debts mount, as the climate crisis deepens, as the social crisis deepens, we need to decommodify, we need to take pressure off the environment, but those financial obligations need to be serviced, because if they're not serviced, the whole thing is going to collapse around our ears. And that puts an enormous pressure on more production, more surplus value in the end. And we need to find a way out of that. And as we begin to try to envisage that, we have to start with a vision. We have to start by thinking of what needs to happen in order for the anger that we talked about yesterday, the film yesterday. Most of you didn't see it. It's a very powerful film. It's the familiar story. It's about how neoliberalism destroyed a world that was in many ways hale. It was far from perfect, but it was vastly superior to the world we live in now, in most important respects, I would argue. How that world came to be destroyed, and how we can try to envisage rebuilding defenses, not necessarily exactly the same, on the basis of which we could try to rebuild societies that would serve human needs and that would allow decommodification. I wrote my thesis a very long time ago, and at the heart of it was the question of working hours, technical change, leisure, and at that time everybody was talking about the leisure society. It was a no-brainer. people said, well, it's obvious that productivity will keep rising, and as workers become ever more materially affluent, they will choose to take more of, and this was the key phrase, more of their share of those productivity gains in the form of leisure. Well, of course, what was wrong with that simplistic analysis was the assumption that the workers' share was somehow predetermined or somehow natural. And what happened is politics changed, finance changed in particular, and Robert has talked about that, and Keynes emphasized that. And so technology, instead of becoming the force that would allow people to be liberated from the drudgery of meaningless labor, as it was termed at that time, technology has now become an ever greater threat to employment, promising even greater unemployment, promising even greater insecurity. So at the end of the day, we're all in this together, and we're all stuck with the dilemma. The same dilemma Marx was stuck with. Marx said, okay, I understand capitalism as a system which will periodically generate massive, destabilizing, humanly catastrophic crises. And he worked ceaselessly to try to find a way, to try to conceptualize a way of escaping from that horrendous cycle. And his phrase was, there's no use dreaming about some nicer alternative unless you can identify an agent who could possibly get us from here to there. Then you're engaging in what he termed utopian socialism. You have to find a mechanism, a plausible mechanism. And this is where he chose the proletariat. He identified the proletariat as a potential actor in that sense, and that had merit and certainly was a serious argument. I think history didn't quite live up to that prediction or that hope or that insight. But whether Marx was right or wrong is not the issue. We're left with the problem, and we have to address the problem. And the problem that Marx posed, that Polanyi posed, that Keynes posed, is the problem of controlling capital in the public interest, in the social interest. And for that, we have to rebuild polities that are able to do that. For that, we have to rebuild ideological and institutional mechanisms that are able to do that. And as Robert has emphasized, and as Armin would acknowledge, the chances of doing that look very slim at the moment. But there is hope. There are new possibilities. And I think both the previous speakers have identified those, and we have to build on those. I like Robert's phrase of a left-wing populism. That's what we need. We need, and the climate can maybe become a stimulant, can become a driver for that, because it is such an overwhelming and such a common problem. It does affect, in the end, everyone. And I think all we can say at this point is we have to understand that we are in this situation. We have to understand that this is the direction we have to move to get out of it. And the evidence is absolutely clear. There's a wonderful book called The Spirit Level, which shows, without any reasonable argument in my understanding, that societies with relatively low levels of income inequality have far lower incidences of all the social pathologies that all of us want to avoid. Whether it's crime, whether it's prison population, whether it's mental illness, far lower incidence of all of those things. And of course, on top of that, what Armin talks about, we need to re-socialize many aspects of life that should never have become commodities. But to get there is going to be a huge challenge. I think Robert is right that the Saunders-Warren phenomenon gives hope. I think the climate crisis can become a lever that can push that forward. It's all we can do. There is no alternative, because the alternative really is barbarism, as Marx said and told us long ago.
Thank you.